Sanitation from Growertalks magazine.
Hey there.
Oh, we're about to get started.
Let's go somewhere.
Hey there, everybody. Chris Beatty from Grower Talks here, and I've got a special guest to talk about sanitation, more critical than ever in this day and age of the pandemic. And he is Mr. Kurt Becker with Dramm. How are you, Kurt?
Good, Chris. How are you?
And you're broadcasting almost live from where?
Kohler, Wisconsin.
Kohler, Wisconsin, way up north
Not
there.
quite
Nice part
spring
of the
yet.
world. Spring is just starting to break. It's coming your way. I'm down just about 3 hours south of you, I guess. Down
Exactly.
like that. Anyway, one thing we know about Dramm, we know about your irrigation experts, both on the consumer end and the commercial end. You've long been known as pesticide application equipment experts as well. But what we in the greenhouse industry know less about you is that you are also really big in the world of sanitation, especially in the livestock world. And that applies more than ever to what we're doing over here in the greenhouse world. Talk about that just a little bit.
You're right, Chris. So for years we've been involved in spraying, and everybody, in the greenhouse we do a lot of pesticide application primarily. In the ornamental space, pretty much exclusively. In livestock, in greenhouse vegetables, we do a lot of sanitation application as well. And a lot of it's the same type of equipment. So we can use a spray, we can use a foam, we can use a fog, all to apply a disinfectant similarly to the way we would apply an insecticide or a fungicide. The difference though is, so in those industries, that's a primary application. It's something that we probably before this could have standed to do more of in the ornamental world, and now it's kind of becoming more of a reality, is that sanitation is going to be more and more important, not only for the health of our plants, but also for the health of our customers, the health of our businesses going forward. And a lot of the tools that growers may already have might be useful for that. There may be some modifications required depending on the types of chemistries they want to use.
Yeah, now you said spray, foam, and fog. So you've got 3 different kinds of sanitation you can do. Talk about each one of those techniques just a little bit, and then we'll get into the tools that you use to produce those things.
Okay. So starting with spraying, we make a full range of different types of hydraulic spray equipment. And depending on the droplet size that you create, depending on the distances you need to cover, depending on how wet things can get when you spray them, a regular sprayer can be a good tool. Spraying down concrete walkways, spraying down more porous type surfaces can be useful in applying a disinfectant. Most disinfectants are going to be more or less effective based on contact time. So depending on the way that disinfectant works and the strength of that disinfectant, anytime you read about a disinfectant, it's going to mention the contact time required to sanitize a surface against certain bacteria, funguses, viruses, things like that. So different chemistries are going to take different amounts of time to do that. That means basically keeping the surface wetted. And the contact time that, when you spray a surface, you're going to get that surface wet. Some things, if it needs 10 minutes worth of contact time, you need to have that surface remain wet for that 10 minutes for it to really be effective. So spraying can be a good tool for that. We've got, outside of the ornamental world, we've got growers that in the livestock industry, we've actually now been selling equipment for sanitation of streets, cities, towns, things like that, where they'll take the hydraulic sprayers and they'll have 2 guys with each with a hose, and they'll have it on the back of the pickup truck, and they'll spray down the concrete walkways. Just again, trying to sanitize the surfaces. Foam plays on that same idea that we want to keep things wetted and we want to increase contact time. We just do it with less liquid. So foam, what we're doing is we're mixing air and the solution. That solution is going to need to require some type of surfactant or have something in it that's going to allow basically the liquid to stick together to create a bubble or create bubbles. Think about when you blow bubbles, it's basically soapy water. You're using a soap in there to make the water stick together so that you can fill it with air to create a bubble.
But there's a
Foam
difference
is,
between suds and foam, though, right?
it's the amount of liquid that's involved, really, and the amount of air. So it's the ratio of air to liquid that's going to make a difference. Um, so there are simple foamers that are on the market. You know, you can buy them that basically they're a little canister with a wand and you'd put your disinfectant solution in there. You'd connect it to your garden hose, and they have two siphoning injectors in them. One siphons liquid out of the little canister, the other siphons air. Um, because it's only working with atmospheric pressure of air, you never can get very much air into the liquid, and so you create suds. Um, what we tend to work more with is air assisted. So we have a pressurized canister that you'd pressurize to 60 psi, just a pump up unit. And what that does is you take that 60 psi air in the top half of the canister and the liquid in the bottom, and we have a mixing valve up at the top that takes that liquid and the air, mixing it. We're putting 60 psi's worth of air, which will put more volume in basically per square inch of liquid. And that allows it to create a much thicker, richer foam. The difference is kind of, if you think about suds, and if you tried to spray those on the wall, they'd fall off very quickly. Whereas if you sprayed shaving cream on the wall, it would stay there for 15, 20 minutes before it would basically start to dissipate. So if your foam is really good if you're trying to disinfect vertical surfaces, if you're disinfecting, say you wanted to disinfect and clean a expanded metal bench in a greenhouse. Something like a foam is going to stick around all the bits of metal, whereas the suds is going to drip through and fall off very quickly. So a thicker, richer foam generally is going to persist longer, and it's going to stick on surfaces that it's harder to get the product to stay with. And then finally, fogging. Fogging is good for a couple reasons. One, we've got directed type fogs where it's a much drier application. You can aim it at surfaces.
It's essentially
So
like spraying, except
like
with a
spraying. So like if you look at, we've got a shot here. This is actually a machine it's called a turbo ULV. It is a cold fogger. It uses basically, you've got a small little tank of your liquid. It's plugged in. You have an air blower on this, and I'm just going to quickly zoom through this little video picture. You can see it's blowing a fairly dry spray out into that crop. Now, in this instance, we're talking about that's being used for an insecticide application, but this same machine can be used to spray down surfaces, can be used to also fog rooms. Basically, that machine has different nozzles that you can put in that will adjust the volume, the liquid flow. The less liquid we put into the air, the drier and the smaller the droplets get. And so when we make a smaller droplet, that's really meant more for space treatment. It's going to float around in the air. Anything under 20 microns is typically going to float for a period of time in the space. That can help with sanitation of the actual air, but it also can help with surfaces because those droplets do eventually settle. You can also make this a much wetter spray that can be used for more directed applications. So like in the video or the picture that I just showed you, you can aim it, and it doesn't float everywhere. It's meant to aim at surfaces, to try and create contact against that surface. This type of machine is going to be much, we've got people that want to use these in office spaces and things, around machinery, things like that, because with a much drier fog, you also you can't go take the hydraulic sprayer and go and spray down people's computers. That's going to be a problem.
But given the right product applied through this, you could actually use this in an office, a break room, a restrooms, those kinds of places.
You need to always be careful of the products that are labeled and what they're labeled for. But yeah, a lot of products that we're commonly using in the greenhouse industry right now for regular sanitation. So quaternary ammonias are a very common product that's being used for algae control. It's being used for sanitation in the greenhouse very regularly. Peroxyacetic acids, basically hydrogen peroxide based products. Those also are very good at sanitizing in a greenhouse, can be used sometimes as a fungicide. Both of those are, depending on the product, they're all registered and supposedly safe for use and effective against the coronavirus. So both of those the companies that are making those types of products are out. I think they've all created rates specifically for that use. Now,
Okay.
using them in your equipment, any equipment that you have, you always need to be careful of. The quaternary ammonias tend to be a little bit less aggressive on equipment than the hydrogen peroxide based products. We have, so some of our equipment, some of our hydraulic sprayers require some modifications to apply hydrogen peroxide without causing a lot of damage. All the fogging equipment that we talked about all the turbo ULV machine that I just showed the picture of, but also things like a pulse fog. A pulse fog can actually be used to disinfect as well. It's going to be much more rapid in the way that it works. Here, you're going to fill a huge space. This is one of our real big ones being used in a vegetable facility. Very commonly we're disinfecting greenhouses like this, a vegetable greenhouse. When they clean out, you use this machine in here to apply a disinfectant and an insecticide between crops. But for sanitation, this type of machine could be used very effectively at just filling the space. Although you want to be careful about where you're going to use it. You're not going to want to use this in an office. I mean, this is a jet engine, and so there's exhaust, but there's also the heat and the potential of flaming to contend with. So we don't want to do this in a location where you typically want to use it in larger spaces. You want to be careful of what you're aiming it at and not get too close to things that might be a problem.
Right. But I can see where you've got multiple sizes of foggers that can be used in those more enclosed spaces, spray equipment for typical greenhouse type surfaces and walks and things. I would imagine foamers might be good on tools, and other things, high contact devices where you want to make sure they're disinfected and you want the material to cling on it and wrap around it. Talk a little bit more about the products though, because that's the next thing. People say, well, I've got the tools. What am I supposed to be applying for this COVID thing? I know you don't sell the products and probably have to be very careful recommending them, but what can you say about it?
One of the chemical manufacturers, I don't know, 20 years ago, told me a long time ago that they made the bullets and we made the guns. Our opinion's always been that we need to understand the bullets to be able to make sure they work in our guns. So we do work a lot with the chemicals that are being used both for plant protection as well as for disinfection. As I mentioned a minute ago, really the two that are going to be the most common for our industry to use that already have labels to be used in our facilities are going to be the quaternary products, quaternary ammonium, and the PAA, peroxyacetic acid type products. They're already very common in our industry. Most growers will have those things on the shelf as well. And they should be able to get a lot of support from the manufacturers of those products because those companies are, like us, working in multiple worlds. They're dealing with these human safety issues outside of the ornamental greenhouse industry. So I would say that
who would you talk to if you wanted advice about what to apply beyond those? What's a good resource for growers?
The chemical manufacturers themselves are probably the best place you're going to find. I haven't found anywhere that's listed the different listed chemistries specifically for use in greenhouses. The CDC has a list on their website of chemistries that will work. A lot of them are by brand name and type. A lot of them are some of the classes that we talked about. So one of the most common outside of the industry that's being used is quaternary ammonium products.
Okay, so CDC recommendations for restrooms, break rooms, offices, those kinds of things.
Exactly. But there's other things. I think microblock is actually labeled for one. I think that, you're going to, the chemical manufacturers are going to be a good resource, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to look at the CDC's website where they actually list different chemistries. You may not find the specific brand name because a lot of those aren't going to spend the time to register themselves for greenhouse use. But the chemistries might be exactly the same. And that's why I say you're going to want to talk to the chemical manufacturers in our industry because they're going to have some experience.
And if I've got a sprayer that's been kicking around out back for 5 years and I use it on all kind of stuff, should I just load it up with some quaternary ammonium and now go spray it around my, break rooms or other places? Or should I maybe dedicate a sprayer for this specific COVID purpose?
There's always a concern with cross-contamination. We generally recommend people don't put herbicides and insecticides in the same sprayer for that reason, is that there can be some chemistry left from one application that may not be real conducive to applying another application. So if I use Roundup in a machine and then I use it to try and apply a fungicide to my plants, there may be some left over that could cause some problems. So at this time, where people are trying to make do with equipment that they have, I don't think, for the most part, a lot of our customers have been using both insecticides and sanitation products. Just make sure that you're flushing really well, you're cleaning very well. If you're going to use a sanitizer, there might be some considerations with the equipment that you have. Make sure that the manufacturer of that equipment, tells you that that machine's going to stand up to that use. These types of products tend to be more corrosive than anything else we're applying to the greenhouse. So there may be considerations with the equipment. But we've seen a lot of growers coming to us in the past, 6 weeks, asking us about equipment that they own and how they can use it in their facilities. And we're seeing some unique, so some growers are concerned about their employees' safety. Basically, they're bringing a whole bunch of people together every day and they want to sanitize at night. And so using things like a pulse fog, using things like the turbo ULV, like, any of our equipment can be used in that instance to fog. One thing that's always important, though, when you do that, we always like to say you can't disinfect dirt. So you have to clean stuff before you just go in there and fill it with fog. If things are fairly clean to begin with, the fog might not be a bad way to go in and make and try and sanitize things, between shifts, between working groups. But the other places that we've seen some growers be, thoughtful of their concern, basically trying to prevent the contamination of their products going out in the world. I've had some growers that have asked me specifically about shipping carts, about trucks. Every day, these trucks are going out full of plant material. They get to wherever they're going with this. It's all being offloaded. There's multiple people touching these things. And then they go back into the truck and then back to the greenhouse. I've got a number of growers that have talked to us about, hey, can I use my pulse fog to sanitize that truck trailer? And using some of the products that we just talked about, truck gets back, all the carts get offloaded, they get sprayed down and hosed down and maybe foamed off, sprayed off to get any debris. Like you're not going to disinfect a bunch of dead leaves, but if you blow them all off, spray them all off, and then give them a foaming with a disinfectant, that's going to be something that's be effective to stay on that surface. And then they'll open up the truck trailer, stick the barrel of the pulse fog in there for less than a minute, turn it off, shut the door, go in the next morning and open it up. We've had a couple growers that have talked to us about that, and they're trying to be cautious about how they might be transmitting. And so they're trying to break that transmission chain by applying disinfectants to the tools that go in and out of their facilities on a regular basis.
Well, that's interesting. It's an interesting world. Maybe growers are going to get better at sanitation, whether they want to or not, and it's going to be good for their crops as well as their employees, huh?
That's been, for the last year and a half, we've been trying to educate the ornamental growers on that topic. A lot of our customers where we've gained expertise in disinfection, whether it's livestock or vegetable crops, they all disinfect. They don't do it from a plant protection standpoint. They do it because they're worried about spreading things like salmonella or listeria or E. coli. And so they have to keep their places very clean. They've got rules surrounding that. But the benefit of that is also they are killing plant pathogens when they make those disinfection applications. And disinfection in the greenhouse between crops, sanitation overall, is a fairly inexpensive step. It's fairly easy to do. And if it can help prevent some plant pathogen issues, that's only going to help growers' bottom line at the end of the year. They're going to have less shrink because they're not going to be throwing stuff away.
Sure. All right. Well, Kurt, thanks so much for the advice and the information. If folks want to learn more, where do they go?
Our website's a good resource, www.dramm.com. We actually have some pages that focus on sanitation up there currently. Otherwise, give us a call. One of the things that we've been trying to do is ensure that this is new for a lot of people that are getting involved in it. Disinfection is different, and so there might be some different considerations. So we really encourage people to call and talk to our team, make sure that they're getting the best advice on how to use that equipment. That they don't just go try something and all of a sudden have something broken or damaged because they didn't ask. So we were happy to take questions along that line.
Good tip. And we're dealing with human safety here. We're talking about COVID, not just spraying for plant diseases. So Kurt, again, thanks a lot. And as I always like to say, be positive, but test negative. Thanks for taking some time.
Thanks, Chris.